All right. So the first item on today's agenda for our Policy and Personnel Committee meeting is the election of a committee chairperson. Are there any nominations for a committee chairperson from the committee?
Yes, I will nominate Deborah Brooks.
Is there a second for that nomination?
I will second the nomination.
Thank you, Ms. Epstein. Any other nominations? All right, if there are no other nominations, all those in favor of having Ms. Brooks as the chairperson of the Policy and Personnel Committee? I see one hand from Ms. Epstein. I see one hand from Ms. Bays.
Ms. Brooks?
Ms. Brooks as well. Thank you.
Gilliard.
Ms. Gilliard? Ms. Gilliard?
Mm-hmm.
Are you in favor?
In favor. Heartily in favor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Greenstein?
He's not on the committee.
I don't get a vote, but I would vote yes if we're on the committee.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Brooks, congratulations. You are now the chairperson of the committee moving forward.
Congratulations. Thank you for the nominations and the second and the vote.
All right. The next item on the agenda is to review and hopefully accept the minutes from the June 18th committee meeting. Are there any questions or comments about it?
No.
Okay. Very good. Then let me move on to the Cindy. So those are accepted as is.
Yep, thank you.
So let us move on to the personnel update. I was asked by a member of the school board to just give an update on some of the vacancies that we have around the district. So what has been happening over the last few weeks is that we've had some teachers that have put in for medical reasons to not return. We are managing each one of those separately because they're unique to their own current circumstances. We've also had a resignation to go to another district to be a school administrator. So as these things happen throughout the year, we're always reposting positions and putting them out on our OLAS system so we can get applicants for the position so we can fill them. So this is an ongoing process, but we are experiencing a much higher volume at the onset of this school year than we have before. And I would attribute that to the very unique circumstances under which we are coming back after having been closed for 6 months. So we will work with each staff member depending on their unique circumstances. So to give you a brief overview of where we have vacancies right now. We're in the process of hiring a staff developer for the district. That was a position that was set up by the school board to be filled. We're also at Salem looking for a guidance counselor and an art teacher. Then we're also at Weber looking for a science teacher right now. At the high school, we are looking for an E&L teacher and a math teacher. At the budget committee meeting, I believe tomorrow, you will be discussing whether to move forward with the PE teacher that would be assigned to Manor Haven. But I was told that is a conversation for tomorrow's meeting at the budget meeting. So that's where we are. We have other positions that are in their final approach to being filled, and the board will see those recommendations on the 22nd Board of Education meeting agenda. Okay. Any questions about that?
Can I ask a brief question? Thank you for giving us the update and explaining how this is pretty much an ongoing thing, but this year it's maybe a little bit different. Are we finding that there are that we're still getting teachers who are we're getting enough applicants, or has the applicant pool decreased? I know in the past we've had a nice applicant pool. Curious if that's changed at all this year. And also with regards to some of the other conversations we've had in the past, how are our diversity, how are we reaching out as far as the diversity fairs? Have they started yet? Again, I know in the past now with pandemic they had stopped, but have they kicked in again, and have we been successful with that?
So I would say on the first question, we are still seeing a high number of applicants for our positions. What is happening around Long Island right now is this situation is not unique to Port Washington, where we have a lot of teachers that are looking for medical leaves, and sometimes that transitions into full years leaves of absence. So there are more districts looking for new teachers than usual. But we have found in most of our hiring processes that we do have applicants to go to that we're comfortable with and we believe will complement our staff. So I think that's the answer to your first question. I think the second question is, we are finding that we are being able to have access to diverse candidates, and you will see that some of them are moving forward in the process. We have seen that in our hiring process over the summer as well, that we are getting the diversity that we're hoping for into the district. We had our new teacher orientation where we had 15 new staff members. Ms. Weisberg was there and met all of them. So I think we're moving in the direction that I think the board has been asking for us to do, over the last 6 months to a year.
Chris, I just have a quick
If I
question.
could just remind the board members to use the chat function. I know Rachel had a question. She wrote in the chat. So can we let Rachel go ahead, please?
And if I'm not mistaken, though, Deb, did you have your hand up to raise a question before that? Before I read that? No, you're
I
good.
can wait.
Okay.
I can wait till you and Beth go.
I'm just wondering, Chris, just so the public has a sense of what's coming, if you can give us a brief overview of the positions that are on their way to being filled that'll be on the agenda for the September 22nd meeting as well.
I'm
I'm
Cindy,
sorry.
do you have that?
I didn't mean to catch you unawares with that.
I don't
If you
have that in
can't do it,
front of
okay,
me.
go.
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me. Cindy, you have it in front of you?
I do. So Taylor Doherty, she's going to be the probationary English teacher over at Weber. That's
Okay.
first one.
I wouldn't, Cindy, I wouldn't use names, but if you could just go through the list of positions that we're hiring for
Okay, sure.
on the September agenda.
Okay. Over at Weber, an English teacher, probationary English. Over at Salem Elementary, leave coverage for the year. Over at Schreiber, a math teacher, also leave coverage for the year. And we are hiring for the nurse over at Pre-K Daily. She's a 0.64. That's everyone on the 22nd.
Thank you, Cindy, very much.
Thank you.
And we will try not to have it grow too much between now and then, but we're hiring very regularly every day, right now. So that may change between now and then.
Okay, Beth,
Chris,
go ahead and I'll go
my
after.
question was, I just wanted to, and I'm sorry, Deborah, I don't know why, but the chat is not coming up on my screen and I can't get it to come up. So I may be interrupting you because I cannot find it. My comment and question is, I remember last year we started the year without an earth science teacher. I found that certain positions in my years here are more difficult to hire for. Are you finding that to be the case again? Like I think it's been math and science fairly consistently.
Yeah. Yes, I would say the area of technology is very challenging hire. The applicant pool is very thin. And then the area of science has also been challenging. We have at the middle school, we have not in the area of earth science, but in general science, we continue to search for a position there. But I would say those are the two areas we're running into the most right now.
Okay. I thank you. And I just wanted to remind people that it's not the first time we've had to start the year without a teacher in a position that we weren't able to hire or find somebody to cover.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, I also wanted to let the community know, I thought chat was disabled, but somebody did post a question. Are we allowing questions through chat, Dr. Shields, or were we going to have people write to BOE@portnet.org? Because I see that there is a question in the chat. So I just wanted to let the community know that we are taking comments, but I thought the chat had been disabled. So
Yes.
So since I'm sorry, Dr. Shields, if it hasn't been disabled, I don't think we can disable it right now.
okay, so
So
then
we can monitor. Unfortunately, I think we probably didn't tell our video engineer that. There is a question. The process for the policy committee in the past has been that we discuss our business, and then at the end we take questions from the community.
yes, and
Okay.
I was going to clarify whether the question should be in the chat or if they should be sent to BOE@portnet, but I see the chat is open, so we'll.
And we have gotten a question, Deborah, emailed to us by a community member. So I guess that person somehow had that information to send to us. So we have 2 questions already. So let's just go through our very
Robust.
full agenda. Okay, I was trying to think of the right word.
And Beth, I couldn't find the chat box either on the Google Meet. They redesigned it. Okay, so moving along. Oh, I had a question. Sorry. How are we on substitutes for covering the classes that don't have teachers?
So we are hiring substitutes. As I was mentioning about teachers earlier, we're hiring substitutes all the time. So we're doing doing that as quickly as possible to make sure we have those classes covered. We have a long list of substitutes that are from years past that are very active. But again, part of the issue that we're facing is that we're reopening under a pandemic. So some of our substitutes are not picking up jobs as frequently as we're used to.
Okay, thank you.
And we're sensitive to that, and we understand that. But that means we have to replenish the list even faster.
Understood.
With people who are comfortable working.
You sound like you're on top of it, so thank you.
Of course. So if there are no further questions, I'll move on to the 4th item on the agenda, which is to just review the tenure process and timeline. That's been provided for you. This is an annual piece of information that we share with the committee, just so you are aware of where we're heading as the school year unfolds. This is a timeline that we established with all of our administrators district-wide, so we can make sure when we get to that May 4th meeting and we can recommend people for tenure, we've done all of our due diligence, and this just shows you the process that we go through in advance. Are there any questions about that? If not, what we do is we then now send this after you've seen it. We send it off to our school administrators so they're aware of the timeline under which we're working. All right. So we will take that next step. The next 2 items on the agenda are 2 policies that we're supposed to review annually that have to do with investments and purchasing. So 6240, 6700, along with the associated regulation of 6700-R, we need to just make sure we review as a district each year. So what we did is we shared this with Mary Callahan in the business office. She reviewed the policies to make sure that they're current. And then what we do is we bring them back to the committee and we let you know that that review has taken place. And we will do this each year. And you have done this each year in the past. So we wanted to make sure we did that for us this year. Any questions about that process?
Nope.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. The next item on the agenda is 8635. this is a policy that we brought to committee this past spring. Then we put it on for a first reading with the school on a school board agenda. From that first reading, there were edits that were recommended by Ms. Brooks. I have since reviewed those edits with our attorney, who recommended the revisions to the first reading of 8635. So you have the red line master of Ms. Brooks's comments. I met with our attorney, Mr. Miller, and went through them. So I would take you to, so everything on page 1 was accepted, as well as on page 2 and 3.
Wait, I'm sorry, Dr. Shields, are we looking at the document that is Ms. Brooks' changes, or the one from the original Ms. Brooks? Okay.
Correct. We're looking at Ms. Brooks's edits, which are redlined, which are edits to the document that was put up for a first reading. So at the top of page 4, and this is right before we get into the section on training, the edit that's recommended there is that the sentence would read, describe if, how, and when, at the district's direction, data will be returned to the district, and then leave the rest of the sentence as is. But take her phrase and insert it after the word when.
Okay.
Then at the bottom of page 4, there is a new paragraph that is underlined and in red. It starts with the superintendent or his designee. That paragraph will be inserted after the first paragraph of section G.
Excuse me, Dr.
Yep.
Shields,
Of course,
where is that going to be inserted?
that's going to be it.
You took my,
So we're in section G.
yes.
So the first paragraph will say the district will respond to data privacy and security critical incidents in accordance with this policy, period.
Yeah.
New second paragraph will read the superintendent or.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you. That's what I just wanted to double check. Thanks.
Of course. Yep. So all the edits on page 5 were acceptable. On the bottom of page 6, instead of adoption date at the bottom, it will say revised with a date, because this policy 8635 does previously existed and will continue to exist. So we're just revising it.
Okay. Good for me.
So those are the edits to 8635. Cindy will update the policy. We will put it back up for a second reading on the September agenda. And that way it will be made as the new policy. Larry?
Chris, I have a question on this. Where it says parent or eligible student, what is an eligible student? Somebody's over 18? Or if it's a student who's been affected, then the way it sort of reads is that all parents will be notified. If it's an eligible student, shouldn't be an affected parent or an affected student. I'm not sure what the word eligible means in that sentence.
Can you direct us to where you're looking?
The last one you just gave us on page, mine isn't in red, unfortunately. The bottom of page 4, where it says the superintendent or his designee will establish and communicate to parents, eligible students, and district staff a process for filing complaints. I guess I'm curious about what the word eligible means.
I
Someone
can
who's
answer
been
that.
privacy violated.
Ms. Brooks, go ahead.
Deb.
Eligible student is defined further up. I'm trying to figure out which page it is. I think it's on the 3rd page. There's a the fourth bullet point down, it says not disclose any PII to any other party without the prior written consent of the parent or eligible student. And then in parentheses, it says, i.e. students who are 18 years old or older.
Okay.
FERPA makes a distinction between a student who is 18 and under and a student who
But
is
now,
18
are
and
we
older.
allowed to release, if a student is over 18, do we get to actually disclose to their parents, or are they then adults and their parents are out of the loop like they are in college? Is there a special provision for 18-year-old high school students?
Are you asking me as the person who went to law school to study this, or do you want the school district lawyer to answer you?
Well, considering there's only 4 lawyers on the screen at the moment. Maybe one of you know, but I guess it is a school law issue, so it might be something we just want to double check with Howard. And I'm not sure, the language would become really clumsy, and I'm not sure it matters as a matter of policy, but we might want to know if and when we have a breach and this person is over 18, whether or not we do notify their parents as a matter of procedure. And I don't know what the answer is.
Right. Can I just point out that would be a procedure question with regards to the lawyers. Our lawyers have looked at this policy now twice. Remember, we had this on for first reading. We pulled it because Deborah had some changes she wanted to suggest. And now it's being put on again, and we need to have it adopted by October 1st per the law. So I think that you're right, Larry, that's a procedural question that would probably be asked to our lawyers when and if, God forbid, we would have to do something about it.
Right. So as they're setting up these procedures, it's just something that should be that should be talked about, and the procedure should say, if the student is over 18, this happens or that happens. So
Right.
if it's a question, we can just pass by to Howard just to make sure that we're in compliance if and when we ever need it.
Fair enough. Understood. Okay, so then we will put this policy back on the agenda for September 22nd for the second public reading. As just a point of information, you have also attached 8635, the regulation and the exhibit. Those don't have to be approved by the board or posted by the board, but they're just there for your informational purposes. All right, so executive session. This is policy 2330. We reviewed this past year. I was asked a question, and we have not brought this policy back to committee, so I'm bringing it back to you now with the answer to your question. So you have the draft of 2330 in front of you, and in the italics, almost near the bottom of the page, you had asked me a question in the paragraph right after number 8. You'd asked me about, well, what I'll do is I'll read you the paragraph and I'll tell you what Howard says we should remove, okay? So it says, normal action may be taken in executive session, except as it relates to the finding or probable cause to bring disciplinary charges against an employee. It should stop there with a period. The rest of the sentence should be removed, and or the finding and or placement of students by the Committee on Special Education. So you can't take action on something like this in executive session. That needs to be done in public. That doesn't mean you can't discuss it, but this is talking about action. So no action can be taken, but it can be discussed if you want.
Got it.
When action is taken, it's not identifiable. It's either an employee number or a student number. But in the executive session, you can discuss who it actually involves if you need to.
Correct. Yep. And that's the practice we have in place. All right. So Cindy, you have those edits?
Yes, we're ending at employee, is that correct? And removing the rest of that sentence.
Correct.
Okay, good.
So then do we put this on for first reading, or do we have to? I guess we made a change. We should put it on for first reading. Can we put it on for this next board meeting on the 22nd?
We can.
Or is that too soon? Okay.
Cindy, we can have this on for the 22nd, correct?
I'll add it, yes.
Thank you very much. All right, moving on to policy 2370, public participation at board meetings. As you were commenting earlier, it's a very brief policy. We had it on for first reading earlier in this calendar year. And yes, Mr. Greenstein, you pulled it from the agenda. Honestly, I don't remember exactly if there was a reason for what the reason was for it. But it's so short, maybe we can just give it a quick read and see if there's anything you want to edit, and then we can put it back up for reading.
Again, it's been the practice of the board for the past 10 or 12 years to not require that people who make public comment restrict it to an item of the agenda. So if that is something that we want to start doing, and it used to be the first public comment had to be related to an agenda item, and the second public comment could be on anything, but that sort of went by the wayside a number of years ago. So it's just a question of, if we're going to continue with our current practice, then we shouldn't necessarily say that it has to relate to an agenda item. If we're going to follow the policy, then our practice should be to say, which agenda item are you speaking about when somebody speaks? And I guess that's sort of a question for us to decide internally, but it relates to how and how the wording of our policy will be, because if we write the policy, we should actually have it be consistent with our practice if possible.
Thank you.
So to Larry's point, when we had discussed this policy and had it on for first reading, we had made a change. It had said the agenda topic, and we had changed it to any agenda topic. What I think Larry is, and Larry, if I'm correct, you would prefer to say any topic, remove the word agenda, so then we are completely open. Anybody can talk about it.
Or any educational topic, because we don't want people necessarily coming out and talking about Afghanistan. So,
why not? It might make it. Might make it a little interesting.
Right. Or any relevant topic, or any topic relevant to the district, or something like
Any
that.
topic relevant to school district business?
Yes.
What did you say, Beth?
Yes.
Any
I think
topic
that
relevant to school district business?
Okay. So any topic, right? Cynthia, did you get that?
Yes.
So I'm sorry to jump in. I'll wait my turn.
I don't like the new
Go
chat
ahead,
feature. Rachel, I think we're going to be jumping.
We have to find the new chat feature.
I found that
It's working for me, but it wasn't working for anybody else. So I'm not sure. It seems to me that if somebody gets up and they identify themselves and their organization, if they have one, and then they talk, we'll know what topic they're on, right? Like the additional of the any agenda topic on here is so that we know what it's related to, if it's related to the agenda. I'm not sure it still needs to be in there. Like, do we want people to get up and say, this is my name, I'm with this organization, and I'm speaking in relation to this issue, and then talk? Or do we want them to just be able to make their comment or ask their question? I mean, this is just, we're lost in the weeds a little bit here. And I know we have a lot of other stuff to go on, so I don't have a big objection. I'm just thinking that if we want to leave it open, we can leave it open instead of making it seem very stilted and formulaic. I think we want to encourage people to take part in the meetings as much as possible.
So Rachel, you want any topic. So you're better with not putting related to education. You would prefer to have.
You know what? I actually don't feel strongly anyway. I think that we could go with any topic. I think we could go with Larry's suggestion. I was just saying, I think we could also leave it out. Because they don't necessarily need to identify anything before they start talking, unless we want it to be that we're limiting them to a topic that's relevant to the school district or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first sentence of the second paragraph says comments should be as brief as possible. I actually want to comment on that part and relate to school matters. So it already says in that sentence, and relate to school matters. So it would be redundant to say it in the first paragraph, but we could always move it and change it. I guess we have to figure out, why was this drafted to say that it needed to relate to the agenda? Was it to keep the public comments confined to the subject matter being discussed at that board meeting? So is the committee saying that's no longer relevant or applicable?
What I would add here is
I don't know.
this topic, this agenda, I'm sorry, this policy has not been reviewed since 1991. And over my years in the district, there has been this, there was a firm rule that you could only talk about topics that were on the agenda for the evening. I think the board over time has moved away from that and been more flexible with the community and being able to talk about anything, at least in recent history. So I think that's why it's up for sort of debate right now. And I think the tone of the board right now.
And we did discuss this, Dr. Shields, in February. We did discuss this. So yes, it hadn't been written since 91, but we did discuss this in a few meetings last year. So I think we said at the meetings last year that we would leave it to any agenda, any topic, but we weren't going to be limiting. We wanted to be as flexible as possible, not like in the past where it had to be pursuant to whatever was on the agenda. Now, past practice has been that in general, parents come to us and discuss topics that are relevant to whatever we're discussing at that moment, but we've had other people come and bring new things to us. So I think maybe we just leave it to Larry's suggestion of any topic, to Deborah's point, where we've already said that it's school related, and then that would serve, I think, us going forward. And then we could put it back on, because this policy was on for a first reading. I'm just saying it again. It has been looked at.
So let's
Let's take out the word agenda.
I would say the end of the first paragraph would just say, and any topic, period.
Related to school matters.
Why, can I just offer a suggestion? Why don't we marry all the suggestions? Meaning, Deborah brought up a good point. Take that first sentence, comments should be as brief as possible and relate to school matters, and insert it after and, so that the sentence reads, persons wishing to speak should identify themselves, any organization that they may be representing at the meeting, and comments should be made as brief as possible and relate to school matters. I realize it's a bit of a run-on, but isn't that what we're trying to say ultimately?
I actually think it's clearer if we just say identify themselves, any organization that they may be representing, and the rest, but take out the word agenda. And then the second paragraph really further explicates the first. I mean, I like it that way, but without the term agenda, because that, there's different interpretations of agenda, and we're not limiting them to the agenda of that evening, because people do come in and talk about other things, and that's fine. And if it's something that's totally off, then we say this isn't appropriate here. If it's not, and it's pretty much covered in the second paragraph, what would not be appropriate.
Well, if I may say, if we're going to say, and any topic they wish to discuss, then we can't limit it to school matters. So it's either any topic they wish to discuss, or it relates to school matters. So can we say, and any topic that relates to school matters?
Why don't we say the topic? Because then if we say, and the topic they wish to discuss, we can take the rest of Nora's suggestion, leave everything as is, because it will be further explicating it.
Right.
To say comments should be brief as possible and relate to school matters.
Okay. And we've always limited comments to 3 minutes. So somebody might think for them 10 minutes is as brief as possible. Somebody might think
we should put
30
the time limit in.
Yes.
I believe.
We discussed this last year, so I feel like we're going backwards again. We discussed putting in the time limit last year. We discussed that we shouldn't put the time limit in, because this particular board has decided 3 minutes. In next election, we may have a completely different board who decides that it's 1 minute, and then we would have to be doing the policy again. It is at the discretion of the board at the actual meetings, and I think we have another policy that discusses that portion of it, I think. I don't remember.
No, I think you're right. I
anymore.
think it's codified somewhere else. And we did discuss the fact that, you know, policies should be sort of broad and
Right.
be able to leave some discretion to the boards that are in place at the time. Because of course it's at the board's discretion to have comments at all, even. It's just, we think that it's really important part of the meeting.
We've also suspended it for things like our budget hearings and other
Yeah, I
kinds
was
of
gonna
meetings.
say,
so
there are
I
times
think we
when
should
we
set
let
it
it go. So I would say I withdraw my suggestion proposal on the 3 minutes. I think we leave it out and we leave it a little more broad.
Okay, can I just ask Cindy to read back? I believe it's sentence 2. Can you just, Cindy, just read it back how it will read?
What was decided? Are we just taking out agenda at this point or adding in the related? There was some conversation about that. I can read it as is.
Change the any to the and take out the word agenda. I think that's where we're at.
Okay.
And then we're done.
Sure. Persons wishing to speak should identify themselves, any organization that they may be representing at the meeting, and the topic that they wish to discuss.
Thank you.
I
Thank
can
you. All right, so we will bring this back. We will bring this back. Cindy, has it had a first reading, do you recall?
Yes, that's what I was just going to interrupt and tell you that, yes, it was actually on for adoption at the last board meeting. So
Thank you. So we'll put it back up for adoption with the edit that was just described.
what agenda will that be going on?
If we can get it on the 22nd, good. If not, we can put it on the October, the first meeting in October.
Okay.
So Ms. Brooks, it was suggested by you and other members of the board that we bring to this committee the chain of command policy. That's 1400. And it has an associated regulation with it that you've been provided, 1400R. I'll turn it over to you.
Deborah, can I just interrupt, because I don't know, there's a list of policies now and discussion that are on this agenda that I think are new, and I think were suggested by you to be discussed. But I also want to remind the committee that we also have agenda topics that we had discussed last year. Then due to the pandemic, we were not able to finish discussing policies that we were to review. There are also policies that we discussed at our June 18th meeting that we said we would like to discuss for this year. So I don't know where in the agenda you have a time frame for discussion of policies for this coming year. But the process generally is that the committee decides what policies are being discussed and how, and what we're just, and then we go forward from there. So I just want to put that keep that in your time frame for today, is that we should just, again, discuss what wasn't discussed last year, and the policies we want to discuss going forward.
Yes, and also I had sent around an email to the board a little later last night about revisiting the pandemic planning, which had been discussed last year. We had started to discuss it, but we didn't have the opportunity. There wasn't enough time to get it onto today's agenda and to get it up onto board docs.
Right, except that that pandemic policy was, when we discussed it in June, we saw that it was already in line with our policy. So we didn't actually, I believe, and if we go into our minutes from the June 18th meeting, I think what we said with regards to the pandemic policy is that it was already in line with our, we called it the contagious disease outbreak planning. It complements the district safety plan already. The policy will be presented at a future Board of Education meeting for first reading. So if what the suggestion is to rediscuss it, because what we had said with regards to the NISBA sample policy, we renamed it contagious disease outbreak planning. And we agreed at that June 18th meeting, and we all just adopted the June 18th 18th minutes as correct, that we would be putting it on as a first reading. So I'm pointing out process-wise, if you're changing it, that's not what we discussed about an hour ago.
I understand what you're saying. I think that we have learned some things since June, especially since we've been tasked with more coordination with Nassau County Department of Health. Also, we have a lot of documents that I'm not sure are in sync with each other. And so one of the reasons I thought about bringing this to the meeting, and actually I thank Beth for that suggestion, was to add some language to it, if it's okay with the attorneys, about ensuring that, and I don't know if this is part of policy, but ensure, because we have so many different documents now. We have the reopening plan that has to conform with various guidance. We have other medical letters going out, just to ensure that all the documents in the district are in sync with each other, that the reopening plan is in sync with all the documents, that the reopening plan is in sync with the constant changes, that our website.
So we should put that on the next agenda for the next meeting, since we don't have that topic for today. So I guess what I just interrupted, I'm sorry for interrupting, about the fact that we were talking chain of command, but I just wanted to remind the committee that we as a committee have to decide what policies we're going to be discussing going forward. So I guess we should go back to chain of command and then add that pandemic policy for the next meeting, perhaps.
Okay, Rachel, I see you have a comment.
So I'm sorry, I got kicked out of the meeting, so I missed how we ended up on this topic all of a sudden. But I thought that it was possible to add a policy to the agenda that we feel is, emergent, or at least a discussion topic that we feel is emergent along the way. I mean, sometimes this happens, that the printed agenda needs to be adjusted. And, if the committee is
Except we don't have the policy in front of us, Rachel, I think what we were told last night by Dr. Shields is that the committee had already been put together, the agenda policies had already been put together and put on board docs. And so we do not have the actual pandemic policy in front of us to discuss. So we can discuss it at a next meeting, absolutely.
So what I believe, not to drag Mr. Shields into the middle of this, but I believe what Mr. Shields said was it was too late to officially formally change the agenda because it had already been published and distributed, but we could have the discussion in the morning and simply amend the agenda and add it then procedurally. And the policies are all online. So it seems to me that having the policy in front of us is a simple matter of Googling it and then sticking it in the chat, right? Deborah, do you have it? Do you have it?
It's in the
chat. I agree with you, Emily. We should be able to look at it if we're going to have a conversation about it.
Right. So let's go through the agenda, though. The printed agenda. Let's go through the agenda, and when we're done with it, we can add things to the agenda. That's the way the process works, right? We go through a meeting agenda.
I think we should maybe hand control of this meeting back over to the chair of the committee to decide how we're going to proceed from here. But I think that her plan was to discuss the agenda and also include this in the agenda.
So thank you. I noted Beth's comment that this would be impossible to discuss without the attorneys. But I think we can start to discuss what the board considers is appropriate policy without necessarily changing language to the policy itself in the absence of an attorney being here. I think it would be helpful, because the next meeting may not be for another month. It would be helpful to get that kind of fleshed out, and then take any questions we need to take to the attorney, so that the first time we're looking at it with fresh pandemic eyes is not going to be October. I had asked Dr. Shields.
I'm sorry, Deborah, I apologize for interrupting. So we are still discussing the pandemic policy right now. We're not discussing chain of command right now. And that's the discussion we're having at this moment, just to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I had asked Dr. Shields, and I had copied everybody in an email yesterday as to what he thought on the agenda could be changed or moved or revised that wasn't as pressing as something dealing with the pandemic. And one of the thoughts I floated was chain of command could be bumped. I'm trying to get back to the agenda. So if with the committee's consent, I would like to discuss the pandemic policy and have committee members discuss the pandemic
Well,
policy.
I don't have the pandemic
what
policy. It was a NISBA policy that we were changing to contagious. I don't know where it is.
I put
If
it
you
in
could
the
send
chat.
it to the committee.
I
I don't see it in
It's
the
not
chat,
in the
sorry.
chat, Brooke.
It's not
Can
in the chat.
And I
can
also, can I
Mhm.
also ask, if we're looking at the pandemic policy, can we bring up our district safety plan? Because I think that there is a pandemic policy built into the district safety plan. And that was some of the question and concern that was brought up before, is whether or not they overlap or marry each other. And since the district safety plan has been approved and posted, it would be nice to have both of those.
Right, which is why we had discussed that.
I don't think discussing the pandemic policy today is going to achieve what some board members here think is going to achieve. I mean, when we do a policy, when we put it on for first reading, for second reading, I mean, it can wait. I mean, there are issues that you're referring to about consistency, but I don't feel that we need to discuss it right now in the policy committee meeting, because we're not going to change the pandemic policy right now. I think we should proceed.
It was the suggestion of an officer to have it discussed today, so.
That was, well, you asked about it, and I actually
suggestion
said
wasn't
to put it
discuss
on.
today. My suggestion was that if we had things to discuss, they should be discussed at appropriate and inappropriate board business methods, which are committee meetings and board meetings, not that it was discussed today.
No, and I actually asked you, I mentioned in response to your question to ask Chris if it could be included, Dr. Shields, if it could be included. And his response was that it's, you know, it was like late at night, and, you know, we can't add the policy itself to the agenda at this point with the appropriate documentation. I think it's really hard to discuss without looking at all of the appropriate documentation.
Okay,
So-
Rachel, take your, sorry, Dr. Shields.
I think what we're struggling with right now a little bit is process, and I think the way we come up with an agenda over a week in advance so we can share it in the board packet is important, and then we put it in the board packet so the whole board can see it, and then, you know, we can alter it in advance of the meeting at whatever the board wishes for. I think at 5 o'clock the night before, altering the agenda is problematic. But I think we want to be nimble and flexible, but the more we can do in advance to prepare for a meeting, it allows everyone to have the materials they want in front of them so we can have a productive conversation. This topic of the contagious disease outbreak planning, I have the backup that was discussed this past spring. I can give that to you in advance of the next meeting. I can also give to you the district safety plan that Ms. Epstein is referring to, so people can familiarize themselves with the two documents before we arrive to a meeting.
Dr. Shields, did we not have this all documentation on the June 18th meeting? Because according to my June 18th notes, this policy that was the NISBA sample policy, which we renamed as contagious disease outbreak,
Yep.
we put on, and my notes say first reading. So we were putting this contagious disease policy on. Cynthia, did we ever put it on a first reading? I know it's been a little crazy. So I guess the question then would be that we would look at this contagious disease policy that we agreed to in June as being put on for a first reading for any sort of changes that we would want to make going forward, right? If we could change it. If we never put it on first reading, then I guess it's still the same policy.
Cindy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe we put it on for first reading. You're muted, Cindy.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So it was not put on for first reading because you wanted to run through it with the attorney one last time.
Okay. So I can do that between now and the next meeting. The NISBA policy that was shared, 8131, we had at the June meeting. I have the similar notes that say prepared for first reading if possible. And the new name would be Contagious Disease Outbreak Planning. So I want to comfort the board by letting you know that we have a section to our school safety plan that addresses this, and that our superintendent and board have been following. But we can certainly bring it back to this committee, or if there's a consensus that there's no edits necessary, we can even put it up for first reading. Ms. Brooks, how do you feel about that?
Well, as I said, having now lived through the summer and all of the planning, I was going to ask the committee what they thought about including in the sample policy that the documents are up to date, that our website be kept up to date with the changing guidance, that we have internal consistency, because we had the state aid guidance coming in, we had the governor's guidance coming in, we have the Nassau County guidance coming in, we have the governor's guidance changing, we have state ed's guidance changing, a lot of balls in the air, and I thought it would be helpful to codify to ensure that all the documents were up to date, that they synced with each other. There was some uniformity and consistency. I guess it goes without saying, but I thought it would be a good thing to include, and also that where the option is given to the district to notify parents, whether it's, well, strep is not a pandemic, but a la strep, a la lice, that the district notify parents when there's a case in the classroom, just like strep, just like lice. I don't know if that's appropriate for a pandemic planning policy, which is why I wanted to discuss it, because it seems very timely. So I know, Rachel, you had a comment?
Yeah,
I actually had oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Were you ahead of me, Julie?
I wrote question in the chat, but but go ahead with your comment and then I'll go after you.
No, it's okay. If you were ahead of me, go ahead.
So
yeah, you're ahead of me. Go ahead.
I just was going to say, in response to what you just mentioned, Deborah, is that in light of all of this, I suggest we just put this so we have time to discuss it. But I really wanted to go back to even what Dr. Shields had just mentioned. I think that we're all having a question about the process. This is my first time on this committee as a policy member, as a member of this committee, as a board member. And I'm just curious if we want to establish very clearly what our process is, since this is the committee, as to if we want to make additions to the agenda, how we'll be handling it, etc., so we can clear this up for matters moving forward, and also what the intention of this meeting is. Meaning, I know at the end you're setting the deadlines for, or you're setting the dates for the future meetings, and in the past, I know that they have set the agenda for what policies we want to discuss. I don't know if we'll be going through that as well. So I'm bringing it back to you, Deb. I don't know if you want to go through the process of all this, of how this is going to move forward, or if the process is changing for the policy committee.
So maybe I can touch on the process, Ms. Brooks, and let me know if it should be different. The process in the past has been that the committee chair meets with the administrative liaison in advance of the meeting and makes sure the agenda is set for the meeting that's coming up. So we followed that process. Ms. Brooks and I went back and forth and had that conversation. Then it's put in the packet the week prior to the meeting for the board to see. Then it's published for the community to see. And then we go into the meeting. So the chair normally sits with the administrative liaison and looks at the priorities for the agenda from the next meeting. Of course, last year, and this is my first year last year, I sat down with Ms. Bays and we came up with a list of policies that we wanted to review for the year. We did our best to get through as many of those as possible. It was quite a lengthy list, and we did that fairly successfully. So that's the process. We can amend the process, but I think as much warning to the whole board as possible is always helpful, especially so we can deliver on your expectations.
I'm sorry, Dr. Shields, I just wanted to add that I got kicked out before I pressed the wrong button again. That last year when we sat down, it wasn't you and I who decided the agenda items. It was based on what the committee had discussed at board development as the items that they wanted to discuss. You and I just really went through the timing on when we should be discussing them. And so that was I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you.
Yes, which I tried to achieve via email, but I completely appreciate the process. I do. This was last minute because of what has just happened in our district at Schreiber and Daly. So I apologize for not having the foresight to think that this would come up. I guess it was wishful thinking that we wouldn't have to deal with this so quickly. So I wholeheartedly agree with your process. I have no problem with proper notice and not putting people under stress. But I hope you, Dr. Shields, and the committee and the board understands why it was this particular policy I thought was prescient. And look, if you don't ask, you don't get an answer, right? So I tried. Rach, you have a comment. And I know we have a lot to get through, and I'm hoping that we can push through this so we can actually do some substance and not.
So I'm kind of horrified by what I'm listening to, honestly, because I'm in a complete agreement with the process. I think we all knew what the process was. I think we've all followed the process. We've been having policy meetings for time immemorial. This is my 4th year on the board. I've never seen this process not followed. We're all on board with it. But we're literally having a conversation now about whether or not we have the right to discuss what the policy should be with very little notice about pandemic planning. And as we sit here, the reason that some of us thought we needed to discuss it today is because our community has been told things that are inconsistent. And we're in a pandemic. And so I feel like we're having a conversation about whether or not this board has the right to have this discussion today, and whether we have the right to save lives or we have to follow the correct process and wait until next month. The community needs to know today if there is a case in somebody's classroom, will the rest of the class be notified? Parents are really upset about this, and this is part of the reason that we wanted to discuss the policy, because from administrators in this district, parents have now been told, yes, we will notify, even though they're not defined as close contacts, and they have been told, no, we will not notify because they're not defined as close contacts, even though there's a lot of documentation that they would be something called a proximate contact and maybe should be notified under various guidelines. There is a lot of, but part of the problem is because we do have to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I don't think anybody here is trying to do the wrong thing, but we're trying to look at and understand guidance from half a dozen different entities who are themselves contradictory and unclear and constantly changing. So I think that what Deborah was trying to do in bringing this to the conversation today was to, now that we're living through it, try to codify a little bit. Where will we look? How will we make these decisions? And should that be included in a pandemic policy? Is there a way we can create order from the policy level, from the board level, that will help with these problems? Because we do have problems on this. And I think, I'm sorry to just throw it out like that, but that's the elephant in the room, right? Is that some of these things are subject to a lot of concern and conflict currently. And I think that Deborah was trying to get this out in the open in a way that was the appropriate way to raise it in public And I support her effort to bring it on now. And I do think that it is at her discretion to do so.
Dr. Hines, I saw you have a comment.
I do. And good morning, everybody, even though it feels like the afternoon at this point for many of us, because we've been working around the clock. I just want to be very clear about two things. One is, when I hear the word inconsistent, it's not because it's our fault. And I want to be clear about that. And I don't think, Rachel, you were implying it's anybody's fault, because there are inconsistent messages coming from, as you said, different entities. The one that I have to listen to verbatim right now is the DOH, Nassau County. And that's really, really important. And what I want to be clear about is, when we speak to them, and we have spoken to them often over the past several days, is that it takes them time to give us information, and at times they change their information based on new information. So the inconsistencies that may come across, we are, to the best of our ability, being as consistent as possible, in conjunction with working with our attorneys here that represent and work for the school district. So, part of the problem is, when I hear about this policy in general, and I don't mean this to come across the way that it may come across, is that, policy or not, we are going to make sure that we are as accurate as possible and we are as timely as possible when it comes to any of these things. And when it comes to speaking to specific classrooms, there is major inconsistency as far as what we can and can't do. And I have a phone call with our attorneys today, later on today, to actually clear up any misinformation that may be out there. And then, of course, I'll share it with the board. It is deeply troubling for us when we come across information that just doesn't mesh at all. And I agree with Deborah as far as what you're saying, as far as certain pieces of information that we have on our website that need to be updated. There is no doubt, because new information comes across all the time, and it needs to be updated in a timely manner. I do appreciate the need to have this conversation, because what's more timely than anything else that we're talking about than, notifying parents if and when something happens and making sure that everyone's on the same page. I totally get that. But we will, as administration is concerned, be as consistent as possible and as timely as possible. So I just wanted to say that, for whatever it's worth.
Thank you. Larry, you had a comment. I'm trying to follow the chat without knowing exactly where to get to the function. So.
Right, I appreciate it. I've sort of two comments. One is sort of a question, being the only lay person on this call, not being an educator or an attorney, but is guidance regulation? Is guidance a suggestion, or is guidance a demand? And that's something I guess I'd like to get some clearance from Howard on. And I know we want to be legally protected, but if there's a way we can go beyond guidance or do something, more within keeping of the community's wishes than DOH may want, if that doesn't jeopardize us, that's something I think we'd like to look into. But as a policy issue, just in terms of when there are cases, and especially if people aren't being notified and they are concerned and they think that they should have been notified, and I think that the child may be at risk, and they decide not to send them to school pending more information, I think the thing that we need to address as a district is whether that would allow them to go into the virtual program, even though they haven't been quarantined specifically by DOH. And that's something I think that comes up to our level, or at least the superintendent's level. So that's something I think we should be discussing, sooner rather than later, because I think it's going to be a constant over this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, Deb, do you mind if I just, to the last part that Larry just mentioned? So I have a list of 4 questions that I need answers to today with our attorneys, and that, Larry, was one of them. Actually, that was question number 1. Question number 2 was what we were just talking about before, as far as notifying parents. So I want to make sure that we have very clear information. And I totally agree. There's a big difference between guidance and a mandate. There's no doubt. A recommendation and then what has to be done. So I will have much more clearer information later on today.
Well, I'll just interject that we went beyond the guidance by requiring masks and 6 feet of social distancing. According to all of the guidance, we could have done either or and been perfectly within our rights to do so. So I think that the spirit is that we should err on the side of caution. I mean, we're having kids who are sick as a policy matter, whether they have a sore throat, a runny nose, not COVID related at the outset, we don't know, and we're telling them stay home. So, you know,
as long as that is not going against the regulation elsewhere. So that's the reason I wanted the attorney to look into it. Because if they say, you know, students, if there's something about absences in the regulations that we don't know about, we might as well double check.
Yes, but also policies are being suspended, and certain attendance policies are supposed to become more lenient. I mean, NISBA has given direction on that we're in a pandemic, so a lot of puzzle pieces are changing. I noted that Emily had a comment. She had also asked us to explain the ask, which I thought I had done, but I can do it again. And then Julie.
No, you know what, Deb? I'm just going to tell you that my ask is this, and my comment is this. I understand that there was a need from the board to have a discussion publicly for the public to hear how we all feel about notification and how we feel about giving students the opportunity to be fully virtual if they feel that they want to isolate or quarantine on their own. I'm sorry, not the word isolate, quarantine on their own. What I am pointing out, I guess, is that I don't know where this falls under policy. That is my, again, point. So we wanted to have a public discussion. We're having it. Okay, congratulations. What we've been discussing is what the district actions are, or what the district has been following as their guidance. It is not the board's guidance. It is the superintendent's, in my mind, job to follow the guidance or for notification. But we as a board are being vocal right now and saying, we want you to do above the guidance. And as we don't have a policy on masks. We don't have a policy on masks and 6 feet. We don't have those policies, but we're doing it. So my comment is that if this was just our opportunity to voice publicly that the board would like to go above and beyond, I think we've done that. I think we can get back to actually the policy meeting and discuss that. That's my comment.
Okay, Julie.
Actually, Nora was before me.
Sorry, Nora, I missed you in the chat then.
It's okay. I've missed you often in meetings. I just want to.
I can't even.
No, that's fine. No, I just want to say thank Emily for what you just said, because I was going to say something along those lines, but probably not as articulately. But I also wanted to respond, Deb, just to you in terms of, yes, we want to go above and beyond, and certainly we have where we can. The question, and we all would like to be able to notify every child's parents in that class. The question is, can we legally? And that's the question with confidentiality, and it's a legal question. And I don't personally know the answer right now. And that I think we have to find out. And I don't think that's a question that's going to go into that pandemic policy.
It's not a legal question. It's not. We notify about all kinds of things. We notify about strep, we notify about flu, we notify about lice.
I have to completely disagree with you. We're in the midst of a public health emergency, and our public health experts really need to be the ones, as far as I'm concerned, they're the ones that should be notifying and or telling us who we should notify, because there are many, many reasons why they may not want certain types of notifications to be done. And we really have to respect that process, because New York State Department of Health, for whatever you think, has been doing an excellent job. We are at a very good place in New York State, and I don't think other people interfering with the Department of Health and the New York, whether it's Nassau County or New York State guidance and guidelines, is a good idea, because they seem to know what they're doing. So in my opinion, it is a question for people who are experts at this, and they have been guiding us, and we have been following what they suggested. And because those suggestions could change in 2 weeks, we have to be very careful about what we codify in policy, because we should, as far as I'm concerned, that's fine, Rachel, because their guidance today is based on today's science. Science 3 weeks ago was different than today's science, and science 2 weeks from now is going to be different than today's science. So I think we really, and as far as I'm concerned, we really need to let the public health experts guide what we do as far as public health notifications. That's where I stand on this, and they have been. I think we can maybe perhaps as a district do a better job of explaining how we are notifying and why and what guidelines we are following and who's telling us to do it. But I think that the superintendent has been pretty clear that he's been in constant contact with the Department of Health in this particular instance. And the district did exactly what they were told by the Department of Health. So that to me is the appropriate process. And if we were going to codify a policy, my policy would be that we follow the relevant state public health experts in a pandemic policy.
So actually in response to that, Nassau County, I was looking on my computer to try to find the link. Nassau County Department of Health has specifically stated that school districts may decide to make notifications to their students and staff in the classroom or building who are not close contacts. So it's
But we got specific guidance from a specific person, maybe Dr. Hines can speak to that, about what we should do in this particular case. And I think every case is going to be a different situation. And so, Mike, I don't know if you want to speak to this particular case and what that guidance was. But I think because of this changing situation, that is the appropriate thing to do.
In this specific case, we had Dawn Bollerman and Stephanie Owen speak to the Department of Health several times. And they stated, meaning the Department of Health, that they would reach out to the parents if and when they needed to, due to the contact tracing and what was happening. Their recommendation, and I think the board appreciates this, and they certainly know this, is that they didn't even recommend for us to shut down, right, for the day in school. So they said it wasn't necessary. Now, I took it upon myself to make a recommendation to the board to do that because I wanted to make sure everything was cleaned and to make sure that everything was in its proper place before our students returned. So the Department of Health, as far as they were concerned at that particular moment, they didn't even want the schools to shut down. So this is where we are. This is, and I agree with what a lot of people are saying here, to be honest with you. But the reality is that I think from the standpoint of sharing more information as far as what the Department of Health states, I think that we can do in our future notification. But as far as that process, they made it very clear as far as what we needed to do. And then again, we went above and beyond what they actually suggested.
So this comes back to notification. I guess we've all had our say here pretty much. I don't see this policy being changed right now in terms of what we should include or not include in it, because I have the sense we don't have consensus. That's the strong sense I'm getting. But if Emily, you had asked before, if there is a way to write into the policy that we will endeavor to make all efforts to ensure all documents are up to date and that our internal documents are consistent with each other when medical medical letters go out from the various schools, and also that Nassau County has given the district's discretion to notify all the parents, and maybe that's not a parents within the classroom. I don't know if that goes within the pandemic policy, the way we would follow strep or lice. But I'm happy to revisit this at a next meeting because I see the time is getting short. And I think the public has heard what each of us has to say. and our concerns. And I think that was the most important part of this at this point. Rachel is asking, can we address how this will be addressed? Go ahead, Rachel. Oh, Julie, did I miss you?
Well, I let Nora go ahead of me.
Sorry.
But I
Go ahead,
basically
Julie.
I was really actually trying to, I'll incorporate Rachel's question in. So then what is the uptick of this? This is a policy meeting. We somewhat briefly danced around the discussion and some comments about the contagious policy, right? And the pandemic policy, or whatever we're calling it. There are questions regarding, is guidance a regulation? Are we going beyond guidance? There's been conversation that's been had that says that we can look at maybe going above and beyond that guidance, but we have some consultation with our attorneys. And then there are questions that deal with notification and how we currently notify families on communicable diseases, of which this would be. So are we addressing this issue at a future meeting in light of the timing? Or do we send some of these questions further to the administration because they are not within the purview of the Board of Education? What is the appropriate route that we can take, and when can we find out the answers to those questions and how they will be communicated so that our public is well informed?
Personally, I think this is a policy issue that falls within our governance and the tone we want to set for the district and for communicating with the parents. But I'm also happy to coordinate with the attorneys to make sure that my view as a board member isn't running afoul of the law. I would hope that it isn't. I think that it isn't. But I do believe this is a governance issue. NISBA has stated that the reopening plan is a governance issue. So I feel comfortable with it, but I'm happy to adjourn the discussion. I think we've made certain points clear.
Oh, I'm not questioning I'm not questioning all of that. I just am saying, what is the action plan? Maybe I'll say it shorter. I'm sorry. What is the action plan in regards to this policy?
The action plan, we certainly can reach out to the attorneys to verify that we are not running afoul of the law. And I think internally to ensure some of these suggestions are getting implemented.
And what are those can you enumerate those?
So for example, the suggestions about.
Deborah, I'm sorry, can I just make a suggestion? Because I understand the urgency and I understand the concern, and I also understand the process. So we have a contagious disease policy that we looked at, we had sent, I thought we had put for first reading. Cynthia said we were sending it to the attorneys. Perhaps we can condense the ideas that we've discussed or send a recap of the ideas that we've discussed today, send those to our attorney with this contagious disease policy and ask our attorney, is it possible for our ideas to be incorporated into this policy, and then send it back to the committee to review so that we don't have to wait for a October something meeting if we're feeling the need to have it done sooner. I mean, so we have the 22nd is our next board meeting. So if we can have this discussion via email on the changes that you may be proposing, then we could potentially put it back for September 22nd if it all gets done, in the next few days. I'm just trying to
I think it's a great suggestion.
put everybody's ideas together and move it forward. I understand the concerns. We all may not agree on whether or not this is a policy for the board or not, but at least let's get it to our attorneys to get their feedback.
I agree with that, and I'm happy to bullet point some of those points. Julie, did you want me to do that now?
If the rest of the committee members feel, I know we're short on time because it is 10:30, but you can make that decision as the facilitator of the meeting if you want to do this via email. But
I think we can all. I think the public has heard. I think there's nothing being withheld from the public in terms of what each of us would want. Well, those of us who would want to change it want included. So I feel comfortable discussing it via email, because there won't be anything hopefully new discussed via email. It's all been aired here. Okay, so I know it's 10:31. I was ambitious with the agenda. I am mindful of Dr. Shields and the fact that he needs to get back to work, and Dr. Hines with the need that you need to get back to work. We have not gotten through figuring out what we will do as a committee with respect to other items we want to see on the agenda. I would ask that we do that via email and come back to the next meeting and set that up, and also decide on the next date. I think it was, I apologize, well, I shouldn't say that, but I'm sorry that we've gotten to the point where we don't have time for community comments. I have seen them on the chat as we've gone through, and I think some of them mesh with what we were discussing. But I think this was a very, very important topic that needed to be discussed, with booting some of the other things off the agenda for today. I saw a chat come up. I'm sorry. I'm not able to scroll through and see what was being said. Dr. Hines, you had a comment?
No, I was just answering Rachel's question as far as what questions that were emerging from this conversation that I would get answers to and then share with the board.
Thank you.
Deborah,
Yes.
I just make a point. We got an email from a community member saying he was blocked from the chat. And I just wanted to make a point that we have not been sitting here blocking anybody. So I'm not sure what happened there, but we have not been controlling the chat. So I just wanted to make that point very public.
Yes.
That if something happened where somebody was not able to post in that chat feature, it was not due to any action on the part of the school district.
Certainly not from our end here, and there are a lot of people participating in the chat. Most of the comments have been in response to the pandemic policy being discussed and supportive of the efforts to discuss the pandemic policy. So I appreciate the public's support in that. So I'm mindful of the time. I again apologize for not being able to read the community comments into the record. But as I said, most of them, the great majority, had to do with what we were discussing here and being supportive of the comments that were being raised. I don't see anything else that was pressing.
Deborah, there was one question that we got via email earlier today that I just, if Dr.
There was
Shields
another
just-
question also in the, right, Beth is that, and there's also some questions about staffing.
Right, the one about the guidance counselors at the high school who are on temporary leave.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just address, let me read or you want to read the question, Deborah? Do you see it?
I do. What is the plan? This comes from Rebecca Hughes Parker. What is the plan for the guidance counselors on leave at Schreiber who have temporary replacements? How long will they be gone? How will college recommendations be handled this year and next year, where there may need to be some continuity? Thank you. It's multi-part too. If you need me to read it again, I will.
It's not really appropriate for me to go into the specifics of a specific staff member in the public forum. But if that person wants to contact their high school, the principal of the school, I think, that kind of conversation can happen at that level about, recommendations and things like that.
I think it's a good general point, Chris, that people are wondering if these teachers are temporary, if they're permanent. So that the point to call your building leaders is probably the best point, that you'll get answers to those questions most directly from the leaders of the buildings.
And that's the chain of command policy that we didn't discuss. But Dr. Shields, there was a question from a parent early on about, are there plans to hire an English teacher at Schreiber? So you listed teachers that we were still hiring for at Schreiber, E&L and math. You did not list an English teacher. Has that teacher been replaced, or can we discuss that?
We can discuss that, and that the finalist has been recommended to central office, and that interview is, if not today, tomorrow. So it's very close to being completed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Brooks, before we do leave, I want to, if we could address future meetings so we can establish a schedule for the year.
If you're happy to hang out here, I am happy to listen to you. I was trying to be considerate of your time. Take
I
it away.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure we have a schedule for the year. What I would recommend, if it's okay with the committee, I would recommend that we move forward with Wednesdays, if that's okay. And I looked at the calendar. If we pick the third Wednesday of each month, that at least gets us a placeholder on all the count on each month moving forward. And
That's a great idea.
So it'd be the
Dr.
21st.
Schultz, we were starting last year, since we were Wednesday, and when we switched meetings to Wednesdays, we were cognizant of the fact that on Tuesday evenings, we have our board meetings, and we had moved it to a 9:30 start, just in case we were having a conflict with a late board meeting. We would give everybody an opportunity, well, everybody being the administrators, chance to get into work and see what any issues had to take place. So I don't know if you want to keep that, maybe make a 9:30 start again, or Rachel likes that idea.
I'm fine with the 9:30 is fine with me.
Okay, I mean, I'm bringing it up for the committee, but that's how we were doing it last year.
That's great. So the third, for the next meeting, that would be October 21st. I read as the third Wednesday. Am I correct?
I believe so. I mapped them out for the year, and I avoided as many board meetings the day before as possible with that recommendation.
Okay. Thank you for hanging on another 7 minutes. That was important, but as I said, I was trying to be respectful of your time. Okay. Anyone have any other comments before we adjourn? And I, again, apologize for going over, but that's really the point. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for my maiden voyage on this. I hope to get better as time goes on. And thank you for the public for joining us. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay.